Now, I've told you all this before, but if you haven't heard it, I'm going to tell you, my family and I are Star Wars nerds. We love Star Wars. I grew up with it. My husband grew up with it. We loved episodes 4, 5, and 6. But then, a few years ago, George Lucas lost his mind and decided he would make the prequels. We're not a fan of the prequels. My husband and I, our children, we've let them watch it because we're good Star Wars parents, and we thought they could make their own decision about what is good and what is bad and all those kinds of things. But the prequels, they seem a little unnecessary to us. They're the things that come before the real story. And what we have this morning, the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, it's a prequel. We don't always read it. We don't always get this part of the story because the real story is what we're looking forward to, the baby and the manger and the shepherds and the angels and all of those things. And today we get the prequel. But unlike the Star Wars prequels, this is a pretty good one. It has a lot of the same elements that are in the main story. That's why it's a really good prequel. It's got the things that you want to hear about. It has an angel, and it has a miracle, and it has parents that thought they could never have a baby or shouldn't have a baby, and then all of a sudden there's a baby appearing. It has all of those good elements. It's a good prequel. And so that's our story for today that starts off the Christmas story. Zechariah and Elizabeth were the parents of John the Baptist. And so it starts off even before he's born with this angelic visitation to Zechariah, who was a priest, who was just kind of going about his life, kind of going through the motions, when all of a sudden this miracle happened. In other news, I got a haircut. My hairdresser, his name is Andy. He's great. I've been going to him for a few years, and if my hair ever looks bad, it's not his fault. He seemed a little down when I went to see him this week. And it's Advent. I know people start feeling a little bit blue when you look forward to Christmas. And I said, Andy, what's wrong? And Andy, I should tell you, Andy is a practicing Buddhist. He's not one of those Buddhists who just kind of says they're quasi-Buddhist. He is a Buddhist. He is from Vietnam. He is very serious about his faith. And so he and I have some great conversations. He knows I'm a Lutheran pastor, and so we have these great conversations about faith and all these things, and I could tell that he wasn't quite himself, and I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I have a friend who, when we were in high school, he did something stupid, and he went to jail for 15 years. He got out of jail a few months ago, and a few months after he had been given this new life, he was killed in a car wreck. Andy was not himself, and he said, I've been thinking a lot about time, and I've been thinking a lot about how time is short. I've been thinking that we don't have a lot of time, and so if you wake up in the morning and you're more or less okay, maybe we should say that that day is a gift, and we should think about that time is short, and we should pay attention to each moment that comes our way. And he said, if I had an hour to talk to people on Sunday morning, and I said, well, I'm Lutheran, we get 15 minutes before they kick us out. But I said, you got to condense it down. He said, if I had time to talk to people, I would tell them this, that time is short, that you don't have much of it. And what time you have, make the most of every single day. Pay attention because you never know when that time is up. And I said to Andy, my hairdresser, the Buddhist, that's a great Advent sermon right there. That's pretty wonderful, because if there's one thing that all these Advent stories have in common, it's that we need to stay awake, and that we need to stay alert, and pay attention to each moment that comes our way, because we don't know how much time we have here. We don't know at all. And so our story for today was Zechariah. Here we have a guy that is a lot like us. He's just showing up to do his job. He's a little discouraged. I think maybe he's even sad. Maybe he's even grieving because he and his wife are getting on in years and they haven't been able to have a child. And that has grieved them. I wondered, because I wonder about these things, how old Zechariah and Elizabeth probably were, because sometimes they ask my mom to play Elizabeth because she has this gorgeous white hair. and she's in her 60s. And I kind of looked it up a little bit, and it turns out they were around 35. He's an old man. They're getting on in years. But for then, they were. And they hadn't, even though they were righteous, they hadn't been given the blessing of children. So I think they were sad. And so Zechariah is showing up for his job. He's going through the motions. He's doing what you do. And people tell us sometimes, pastors only work, 1 day a week. Ha, ha, ha. Very funny, especially during Advent. Zechariah only had to work 2 weeks out of every year. That would be a pretty good job right there. 2 weeks out of every year. And so his 2 weeks came up. And so he goes to Jerusalem like they do every year. And so he shows up for his job like a lot of us do. And he's sad. He's going through the motions that we all do. And he's not really expecting anything, I don't think. He shows up for his job. And he's given a little glimpse of grace. They say, we've cast lots. And we've determined that you, Zechariah, you get to be the one the priest who once a year goes into the Holy of Holies and burns the incense, which was a great honor. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for a priest to be able to do this, to go into where God actually lived. This wasn't just church. This wasn't just a sanctuary. This was with the Ark of the Covenant and everything. This is where God was supposed to dwell. And so he gets this great honor to go into the Holy of Holies, burn the incense, wait a few minutes, and then come out and pronounce the blessing to all the people who are outside praying. I think maybe Zechariah thought, well, I haven't been given children, but I've been given this great honor. And so, like we do, he's showing up for his job. He's been given a little bit of grace, and I think maybe he's grateful for that, but he's still not expecting what's going to happen. He goes into the Holy of Holies to burn the incense. He's all by himself, and God shows up. I don't know about at your house, but sometimes when we're looking in the mornings for coats and shoes and hats and all those kinds of things when it's cold outside, sometimes the coat that you just can't find, it's hanging in the coat closet, right where it's supposed to be, and you can't find it. And I think in the Holy of Holies, right where God was supposed to be, Zechariah is shocked when God shows up, right where God is supposed to live. And he doesn't just say, even though he's supposed to be doing this, he doesn't just say, oh, hello, angel of the Lord, I was expecting you. He's shocked and he's terrified and he doesn't know what to say. There's a similar story that you'll hear in the next few weeks, and it involves a teenager. And I'm going to give her a pass at being afraid when an angel comes to see her, but Zechariah, he's supposed to be waiting for God to show up. He's in God's house. He's in God's presence. And God shows up, and he's terrified. He wasn't expecting God to be in that place, even though he's showing up for his job. He's a faithful priest. He's going through the motions just like we all do, and God shows up right in front of him and talks to him even, and tells him that not only is he going to have a child, but he's going to have a child who's going to be a prophet, who's going to lead people to God. All of these wonderful things. And then Zechariah, instead of saying, thank you, he says, could you give me a sign? You mean a sign other than an angel showing up in the middle of the Holy of Holies and talking to him and telling him all this? Zechariah wants a sign. So the angel says, I'll give you a sign. You're not going to be able to speak until this child is born. You, instead of Mary willingly pondering these things in her heart, you're going to be forced to ponder them. You're going to have to think hard about what just happened to you. Because you are a priest of God, and you walked into the Holy of Holies and were surprised that God was there. And we do that. I do that. We walk into a place that is supposed to be holy, like a church, like a chapel, like somewhere like that, and we expect to get a little bit of grace. But do we expect for God to show up? Do we expect God to speak to us? Do we expect for God's presence to be in that place and to hear the wonderful message of God that God has promised to us? Well, most of the time, we don't. We just go through the motions like Zechariah. We go through what we have to do for our daily life. And this is where this story is so amazing. God shows up anyway. God shows up in spite of Zechariah's lack of faith and his fear. God shows up right there where God is supposed to be, which is a sign that God is going to show up in the most unexpected of places from there on out. God is going to show up in the life of a teenager, unexpectedly expecting. God is going to show up in lives that may not be expecting it at all, like yours and like mine, and maybe when we least expect it, or like in the coat closet, right where God is supposed to be. This is our miracle, that God shows up even, and in spite of our lack of faith. God shows up right in front of us. This story reminds me of another story, and it's not Mary's. It's a story of another Mary who was walking in the garden early in the morning. You might remember this story, and an angel came to her, and she didn't even recognize that it was Jesus after Jesus was raised from the dead. She didn't have any faith, but Jesus had the faith for her. God comes to us in the middle of our lack of faith and appears and speaks to us and tells us all the things that we need to hear. So today, I tell you again what Andy, my Buddhist hairdresser, told me in the most unexpected of places. Keep awake, stay alert, pay attention. You don't know when God is going to appear in the most likely or unlikely of places. God might even show up in church. Amen.